Okay. Good morning. My name is Andrew Bennett. I have the honor to serve as Faculty Senate President, and I'm here to welcome you to the Kansas State University Spring Forum at the Polytechnic campus. We are joined by Provost April Mason and President Richard Myers, who are here to take questions about whatever it is you have questions about. We also have Rick Zajac, who is chair of the Polytechnic Caucus. He has a number of questions that have been collected in advance. So we have a microphone here. This is being streamed to the other campuses, so we would prefer that you come up and use the microphone so that it can be heard. And are there any questions? Do we want to start with any comments, any opening remarks? Did you want to make any opening remarks?
I think, let me come over to the microphone. I guess I'm on a microphone. So the only opening remarks I would make, the remarks to begin with, is that April and I are very pleased to be here. It's nice to see a little rain on the way over, a little, but at least some. And nice to be on campus again. Appreciate the opportunity to be before you. So that's all we'd like to talk about. We'll stand up here and answer whatever questions you have and whatever they have from the audience or wherever we get them, okay?
Well, let's go straight for the money.
The money? Okay.
Now that the 20th day numbers are in, what more do we know about the deficit in tuition revenue and the university's plans to manage it?
So the way I would answer that is, if we're talking about FY17, the deficit in enrollment presents a bill to us of around $4.5 million plus or minus that we still have not reconciled. So that's an outstanding debt due to lack of tuition revenue that we have to deal with before the end of this fiscal year. And we will do that. We've agreed we're going to do that with a salami slice cut across organizations at this point, and it'll be less than 2%. It'll be between 1% and 2%, we think. That's kind of where we're talking. I don't know that we can accommodate any of that $4.5 million out of other budgeted items, and at this point, you don't have much flexibility, right? Your utility bills are going to be what they are. The personnel costs are going to be what they are. We're not going to lay a lot of people off or any of that, so we'll peanut butter that. As we look forward to FY18, we will not do that. We have pretty good consensus among deans and the Budget Advisory Committee that we'll take a more strategic approach to any additional cuts in FY18 that we must take. Exactly what those are, we don't know yet. We have a feel for it, but we don't know yet. Nobody will be happy, so it won't be pleasant, but we feel like if we take a significant cut in 18, it cannot be just salami sliced to everybody. So the other thing I'd say about 17 is it's not clear we're out of the woods yet with the state legislature as they try to find monies to make up for their budget deficit in the state level. I was asked at the Senate Higher Ed Budget Committee meeting how we would accommodate at Kansas State a 6.5% cut, which amounts to $11 million in 17, in addition to the 4.5 I just talked about. So you're up 15, 16 million. How would you accommodate that with now 4.5 months to go in your fiscal year? And I didn't have a good answer because I don't know how you would do that. It would be dramatic, whatever it would be. That's since off the table, but then there was a 3%, and it's sort of off the table. But as they struggle with how to make up the roughly $350 million shortfall they have in the budget, secondary ed, higher ed's always on the table. So this afternoon I'll be in front of the Senate Higher Ed Budget Committee presenting K-State information for 18 and 19. And we'll see if we pick up anything while we're in Topeka on that. So I don't think we're out of the woods on further cuts, but you ask, 17 is primarily the $4.5 million hit to revenue because of decreased enrollment that we have to deal with. So anything to add, April?
I think you've covered it. Thank you.
She doesn't always say that. Usually she says that's not quite right. So.
I'm not part of the formal party here, but I wanted to ask a follow-up. It has been rumored for a long time on this campus that because of the cost of capital equipment on this campus and the low number of students, that the campus is fairly highly subsidized from the Manhattan budget. I want to know if that's true or not. Is this campus highly subsidized? Is it a little bit subsidized? Is it self-supporting? Just talk a little bit, if you would, about how that situation works.
I'm glad you asked. There is very little, if any, subsidization from the Manhattan campus to this campus. Both our College of Veterinary Medicine and the Salina Polytechnic campus keep their own tuition. So if your enrollment goes up, you get to keep that additional revenue. If your enrollment goes down, you suffer that decreased revenue. The deficit that we're talking about, that the President just described, the $4.5 million, is a deficit in the Manhattan campus enrollment that we'll have to deal with. You're already dealing with that. Your dean, your budget office deals with increases in enrollment and decreases in enrollment and the concomitant tuition revenue itself. We do not subsidize this campus.
And I think that's why Verna is called a CEO, because she has the total package. Same thing for Dr. Ralph Richardson in Olathe. They deal with they got their own pot. And sometimes the pot's pretty good and they're better off than everybody else, and sometimes they're not. But that's how we work it.
The addition that I'd make that's a little distinct between Olathe and Polytechnic is because Olathe literally came out of the ground.
Right.
We built the building, we're paying the bond on that building, we have revenue from the Johnson County Education Research Triangle, but we give the Olathe campus some subsidy. But that was to get them started. And now they're in their 5th year, and we anticipate pulling that back.
Well, shoot. My next question was going to be about how you plan to distribute the cuts to the units this late in the fiscal year, but I think you kind of covered that one.
Yeah, and this is for Manhattan, but yes, that's what I was referring to. Sorry.
More positive note.
Good.
This is a quote from the last forum. Manhattan is becoming the Silicon Valley of bioagro defense. So could you explain the statement for the benefit of faculty who might not be as aware as they should be of what's going on at the other campus?
Okay, so I'll give that a shot because I participated in the 2-day conference from which that quote emanated, missing a dean's retreat where we were talking about budget. So Dr. Ron Truan, who has been working a lot of NBAF-related items, we did a couple things. We were back in Washington at an event hosted by the Bipartisan Policy Think Tank thing, and it was hosted by former Senator Tom Daschle from South Dakota. You may remember he was the Senate Majority Leader a while back. And we had a panel of some experts and a more general panel with Daschle and me, and was Tom Ridge part of that? But anyway, it was a former Secretary of Homeland Security. I don't think Tom was there. We had a nice panel talking about bioagro-defense and thinking about agriculture as infrastructure, which I think if you come from Kansas, you do. If you're in Washington and you're in the Department of Homeland Security, you may or may not equate it to railroads and water and cyber and all that. But to me, it's the same thing. It's a piece of infrastructure that there's a responsibility to protect, either against naturally occurring, like Homeland Security takes care of hurricanes, that kind of stuff, or tornadoes in some cases, or whether it's terrorist inspired. So we're trying to raise that profile, and as part of that, so after that little day in Washington with this thing at the think tank that got some pretty good press, the Blue Ribbon panel on bioagro defense, which does include Senator Daschle, former Senator Joe Lieberman, Tom Ridge, who was Secretary of Homeland Security, and some other notables, they decided to come to Manhattan, Kansas at our invitation and spent 2 days with us. And the 2 days, Senator Daschle, who was leading the delegation of the members, there were 2 members of the commission, a fellow named Weinstein, who was in the Bush administration in Homeland Security, and several of their staffers had a day of kind of show and tell around campus, and then the next day they conducted an on-the-record hearing, for lack of a better word, where we had panelists from around the country talk about threats to our infrastructure and other issues. Tammy Beckham was one of those, our Dean of Veterinary Medicine was one of those people. We had alumni that are in the vaccine business when it comes to cattle. So we had folks from Minnesota, from Nebraska, from East Coast and so forth, some Homeland Security folks, some Department of Agriculture folks. It was the second day when former Senator Daschle was kind of introducing the day. Based on what he saw the day before, he made the statement that Kansas State is the Silicon Valley of bioagro-defense, at which time I immediately wrote it down the best I could to make sure it was exactly accurate. And you'll see it a lot. It's a nice thing that he said. I mean, it's an important thing. It may even be mostly true. And I think, well, so when you talk about bioagro-defense, there's no one university, no one town, no one anything that can, but we have the makings of the Silicon Valley. And what makes that true is the National Bioagro Facility going into Manhattan, Kansas. We have a lot of intellectual property and a lot of knowledge in the College of Agriculture. It's more than that. It's got to be interdisciplinary, as everybody knows, but mainly centered around the College of Agriculture. There's just got to be things we can do here at Polytechnic that can support that. But that's where it came from. I thought it was a great quote. We were in Washington. K-State goes to Washington every spring to talk to our federal delegation and folks around town, and we just came back from that. And while we met with Senator Daschle in his office, former Senator Daschle in his office, and showed him some handouts we had that has his quote there, and we give him credit for it. We put a little asterisk up there, so we don't claim we made that up. We like the heft that he brings to this issue that he's been working for quite some time, a passion of his. So now our job is to make it not mostly true, but very true. But it doesn't mean that we're not going to partner with KU Med. It's not that we don't partner with A&M and Texas Tech and all these schools that have pieces of this. But with NBAF, we have a real leg up, and so I think it's correct, and we want to capitalize on that. So that's why you've heard that, and it's new, and it's because of those 2 days. We took this group. So Wednesday was show and tell day, if I remember the days right. Wednesday was the first day, and the BRI was down for its several months cleaning. We took them through the BRI, had lots of meetings where some of our experts in this field would talk to them. And then we wound up at dinner at the West Side Stadium up in what we call the University Lounge, which is the Alumni Association, the foundation, and the president's office, where we host people at football games. And we set it up for dinner. We had the big video screens lit up with our brag points. They were constantly going through all our brag points, and we can come up with a lot of them. And after the end of that day, they were just blown away by what Kansas State University had to offer in most every respect. And I think that motivated Senator Daschle then to make those comments the next morning. So again, it's one of the things I think as a president you try to do is try to draw focus, national attention to those things we do really, really well. And that's in bioagro-defense, we do really, really well. And we need to do more, and we got a lot of issues around that, but that just gives us a way forward. So I'm sorry, that took too long, but you can repeat it as often as you want to. You can figure out how you fit in that, but I don't think anybody else can quite claim that. and NBAF is the tipper, tips us over. Anything to add on that, other than I missed the Dean's retreat and April wasn't happy with me. So. And it's right, that was a very important meeting because we were talking about how we're going to accommodate future cuts and get the deans to buy into maybe a different methodology than just everybody gets a slice.
I would like to remind everyone that this is an open mic, so if there's any questions from the audience, please.
And please use the mic, as Dr. Bennett said, because we'd like to make sure the people that are watching can hear.
Total rewards.
Yes.
We still have support staff who haven't received this letter they're expecting to get explaining how it all falls out, and where are we on that?
Okay, we'll double team that because I know a little bit and April knows all, but
Let me
you mind
start.
starting? Yeah.
At our open forum on the Manhattan campus, Jeff Morris could be with us, and I think you know that Jeff Morris is currently serving as the interim Vice President for Human Capital Services. And he indicated that I think it was February 1, staff were to receive a letter that is not prepared and ready to be distributed. The main reason for that is, and he quoted a number like 800 or 650 different questions and comments came back from all over, from Polytechnic, from Manhattan, from Olathe, with concerns about how the position descriptions have been put together for staff. Each and every one of those questions has to be responded to. They have been doing that. We have not seen those come back to us yet. So the questions I put forward to HCS have not been responded to as yet. I think the bottom line from my standpoint are two things. We indeed want to move forward on total rewards. We want to do it, however, and that's my second point, in the best and most responsible way. So we have to have data that has been carefully looked at, has been vetted, and these questions that came back from supervisors and staff need to be addressed. One of the things that Jeff has shared with us is they have compared the analyses that were done for Kansas State University to what has been done for KU. They're a little bit ahead of us in this whole process. A couple of examples that come immediately to mind. Faculty and staff in the libraries at Kansas State University were classified at a lower salary than faculty and staff at the KU library. Well, we don't compete for faculty and staff for the library by region. We compete nationally and even sometimes internationally for staff and faculty for our libraries. So that was a huge issue for our Dean of Libraries as she tries to be competitive with the salaries and the descriptions of the positions within her area. So it's just one example that we're trying to do. The other thing is, you may well know that while we were making progress forward in total rewards, the whole issue of the Fair Labor Standards Act came up. You know, you try to do the right thing. We were told it had to be in place by December 1. We, that's the royal we, people within HCS worked tirelessly to get FLSA put together and all the changes made by the December 1 deadline, and then it was contested in court and is now on hold. So lots of reasons for the delay in total rewards, but the biggest one being that we want great data, we want good data, we don't want to just do something without the data being vetted, but it does not indicate a lack of support and us wanting to move forward on it.
And as I understand the process going forward, and we have to thank Jeff Morris for realizing there were more questions than answers when he first became the interim director of human resource capital. So he said we got to pause. The staff is exhausted because they were working more than just this issue, and they've done I think a very good job, a process-driven job to answer a lot of those questions. So it won't be very long before the letters go out to supervisors, who will then be asked to discuss it with the people they supervise. That's the next step in this process. And there'll be more questions and be things that'll have to be worked out, and then we'll be ready to implement. So that's where we are. I don't have a timeline, I don't think, off the top of my head. Sooner rather than later, but we're going to move forward on this. We have people often ask, well, what were you most surprised at? Well, what I'm surprised at, we don't have a classification system like the rest of the world does at Kansas State University. We just don't have it. And it's gone on too long, and there was a big push to get this done. It couldn't get done before Cheryl Johnson left the office, but she was on the right track. And so Jeff said, time out, let's get this right, because we're just going to confuse people if we go forward right now. So they've been doing that work, an amazing amount of work. So that's where we are. We're moving forward, but at a more deliberate pace.
I'm not going to use the word lobby. What efforts are you aware of to work to have concealed carry repealed on campus? And how much progress do you think these efforts are making?
So Higher Ed Day in Topeka, all the universities and community colleges participate. We decided to do this instead of having a K-State Day at the Capitol. We decided to do it all together, which I think is more impactful because you fill up the rotunda and the free spaces there in the Capitol with displays from all the universities and community colleges. Pretty powerful, I think. Sue Peterson asked the other presidents of the universities to go together to talk to the leadership in the House and the Senate. The only one that agreed to do that was KU. So Bernadette and I went around to all the leadership together. I'm not talking about KU or K-State, we're talking about higher ed and the need for reversing this trend we're on. In those discussions and in walking around the halls of the Capitol, I was surprised, but a lot of legislators came up to me and said, thank you for your stance on this. Because we have a lot of legislators that believe guns are not appropriate to have on a university campus. There are legislators, of course, that do. There are faculty members. I've had both faculty members come and say, thank you very much for your stance, which is I don't believe it's appropriate. To other faculty members say, hey, I conceal carry now, and I think it's appropriate. So there has been some work to try to exempt universities from the new law that takes effect on 1 July. I don't know what success they're going to have this year, but there's a lot of talk in Topeka about that. They had a committee hearing, excuse me, folks, sorry, committee hearing 3 weeks ago or something, where they asked me to come down and be part of that, and I was told that I can't lobby, so I can't lobby. But if somebody asks my opinion, I can give it, I suppose, I will. But I can't go down and lobby the legislature. So what I've been encouraging people to do, if you're concerned about that, then let your voice be heard. And it can be singly, it can be faculty, it can be students. I think faculty and students have a lot louder voice and probably a more respected voice than my voice in this case. And I'm encouraging people to find out who's responsible down there and start flooding their inboxes until they go tilt. So they know that voters out here are concerned about this issue. So it's don't expect the administration to be able to do much. We've done what we can do. I've made my statements. If they've been appreciated, they've been helpful. But now it's up to the mass of us to do that in a non-K-State hat. Don't identify yourself as, whatever, but as a citizen, you're concerned, and that's appropriate. And I think that will have a big impact. And I don't know, I'd have to have Sue here to give me a reading on this, but my gut tells me we may get there. It may not be this session, but I think we'll get some relief. I'm thinking. There's a groundswell to do that. So we'll see. And if it's not this year, then we'll attack it next year.
Do you remember the survey that the group from the Institute at Fort Hays did last year on concealed carry? It's a very divisive issue, and it was a little more evenly split than I had anticipated, with those who were pro and those who were con. So we're hopeful from all the things the President just mentioned and Sue Peterson keeping us apprised. There have been some things in the House move forward, but it's anyone's guess. And our hands are pretty much tied by the regents that indicate we can't lobby as university leadership.
And let me make a point that whatever your stance, you ought to let the legislature and the legislators know what your stance is. It doesn't have to be what we believe in. It can be whatever you believe in. But that's how we impact the process. They will pay attention. In our trip to Capitol Hill last week, it was noted by some of our federal representatives back there, federal delegation, that on some issues they get flooded with voicemails till the voicemail machine gives up, emails and so forth. So they pay attention, and it's an effective way to try to get people's attention and show what we think. And so no matter what side of the issue you're on, let your voice be heard.
Same topic. With concealed carry comes the need for training in safe handling protocols. The same students who aren't great at putting away their phones during class might be equally unclear about keeping their guns out of sight. What initiatives does K-State have in mind for training faculty and staff on how to deal with the new situations we're likely to face?
There have to be training on our policy, and we have a very good policy, and the students should not be confused, because if they expose a gun more than accidentally, and that will be in the eye of the beholder, there can be severe consequences for that. So the policy is as strong as you can make it in accordance with the law. We've pushed that pretty hard. So you would expect them to pay more attention if they were carrying a weapon than there's the ubiquitous and ever-present. And I almost ran into a car today because I'm looking at my cell phone. Not me, but I mean, I have in the past. But you know, people with their head down, being amused by whatever's on the screen or the conversation. So I think it's going to be taken a lot more seriously, and we'll make sure faculty and staff know those rules. They have to know what the rules are. And specifically, I know there's some stuff being prepared for that. So. Training piece. So, yes, Fred.
I serve on the committee that's preparing the information about training that the president is talking about, and we are in the process right now of developing a method to let people who need to know what the rules are, and B, not allow concealed carry to become our new logo, right? We don't want to replace the Power Cat with a picture of a handgun. So we have to be careful about how we train and inform so that we don't do extra damage to the university's image among the general population who'd think maybe they might send their kids to some other state to go to school. Right? We have to be careful about how we manage the image, and yet make sure that people are effectively informed about what the policies are and how to deal with them if they're broken, and so on and so forth.
One of the things that Fred's committee has been informed by are other universities that have gone through this same transition. The Idaho universities, the Colorado universities, and just this past summer, the Texas universities have gone through this. So we are being informed by other universities that have gone through a very similar process. And I actually chaired a group of provosts this past summer on concealed carry and weapons on campus and how they had dealt with different parts of that, more from the faculty standpoint as provost. You know, how did faculty feel about that? How did it affect discussions within classrooms? So there are a broad range of issues that the committee Fred serves on are dealing with.
And thanks for your work on that, Dr. Guzman. More questions?
Yes. This is a long one. As an outstanding way to provide efficient, highly effective university leadership travel, provide excellent student learning opportunities in a structured manner, and to place our aviation programs back into a nationally recognized position.
We need a jet. Is that the end of is that how?
Almost. When do you project Kansas State University Aviation will operate corporate aircraft again?
Well, I don't know. You know, if there was a different budget situation, we might have a clearer answer. But we're working, and your dean and CEO knows very well, we're working some alternatives to try to figure out how to do that, because it is a goal. It's probably not a break-even goal. It's an expensive goal. You can mitigate some of the costs by athletic department buying some hours on whatever we get. But we have one in particular, generous alum that has aircraft that is trying to figure out a way to do this and help us in this regard. And I hope we can get that done. That has got to be a goal here. We go back to that. But I can't tell you that it's going to be tomorrow or even next year, but that's where we have to be eventually, I think. So, and all good ideas can be funneled to your dean, and we'll figure it out. If you got a slick way of doing it. It's just not cheap, right? Not cheap. It's expensive. And when we haven't increased faculty salaries, so how's the faculty going to look at the fact, hey, we've got a jet now. Oh, gee, we haven't had a across-the-board faculty raise for X number of years. Might not go over real big. We have folks, some of our custodial folks that are below the 20th percent of median pay, less than living wage, working in our facilities, keeping them nice for everybody. How are they going to think about, well, now they got a jet. Oh, that's cool. So we got to balance all this. So that's why the budget is an important part of that. If we can find a way to do this that is mostly budget neutral, then we can do it. And we can get pretty close, I think. So I don't want to put a damper on it because I'm all for this.
Well, since you touched on salaries, let me move to the...
And I will tell you that well, never mind.
At the previous open forum, Provost Mason mentioned struggling to retain faculty who, quote, already have one foot out the door. What do you say to faculty who are threatening to leave?
Oh, it depends. I work with the... You can read into that anything you want. But I field questions from deans who have had a department head or a unit leader say, I cannot possibly lose this person. And so I don't talk to them directly unless the dean or department head asks me to, and I have done that actually, to reach out to a faculty member to say, I know you're working with your department head, I know you're working with your dean, I just wanted to underscore how important you are to our campus. We continue to have retention issues. Salaries have not progressed the way any of us would have hoped they would. And in some cases, deans come to me and say, I must retain this person. What can we do together to help that happen? So it is a concern. Would it completely stop if we had incremental increases in salary? Probably not completely stop, but I think it would settle down some.
And so in an effort to ensure good communications from the administration, I host new faculty along with more senior faculty for breakfast. Done this once. I intend to do it lots of times. And talk about their concerns so they know that we know what they're concerned about and what they're... And the reason we do younger faculty with more mature faculty is that the more mature faculty is code for those that are kind of bought into K-State and will probably stay no matter what. And the younger folks may be more at risk of leaving. So we pair them up and we have breakfast and we chat about things and our goals and how we're trying to work the problem, just to make sure the communications are clear and they know we care about it, because we do. It's probably the number one issue, is fair compensation to everybody on campus, not just faculty. Everybody.
The other question on faculty retention mentioned a perception that it seems that when it comes to retention, value is placed on discipline of study rather than on quality of teaching. I didn't know if you wanted to speak to that.
It's not been my experience. I've had retention requests for faculty whose predominant workload is teaching, who have made huge impacts on students that we just feel should not be lost. I've also had retention requests for our extension faculty who do predominantly engagement within communities that know that area particularly well, and it would be very difficult to get someone who knows it as well quickly. And I've had retention requests made of predominantly research faculty, but I'd say that's not been my experience.
I'm not sure to what extent you can answer this. What is the status and timeline of Dean Fitzsimmons' 5-year review, and when will we know the outcome?
No, I can address that, and there are a number of people in this room who are serving on the evaluation committee. I charged the committee last Thursday. The data is in. There was a survey, there were external letters requested, all that data is in. I was a little slow in getting the committee put together and charged, but they were charged last week, and I've asked them to have a report to me in late March, very beginning of April. What happens after that is I review that, I work with the dean, and then I make an announcement. But it's with the committee at this point.
Thank you.
Word to the wise, one more thing, sorry, Rick.
Yes.
Word to the wise, don't hire 5 people in the same year, because they all come up for their 5-year evaluation the same year. Just saying.
Other universities provide professional development funding to pay for faculty membership in professional organizations. However, this is not available at K-State. Will K-State provide funding for this purpose in the future?
Well, it also hasn't been my experience that a lot of universities do that. I've paid my own professional organization dues at Purdue University, at Colorado State University, and at Kansas State University. I'm not against that, but I also sit on the Budget Advisory Committee where Andy Bennett sits as well, and if we were going to prioritize professional dues against salary, where would you go? I just don't know that that's within the realm of our ability with budgets, and I don't think it's that common. Maybe it's just the 3 places I've been, but I don't think it's that common. I'm willing to be argued with.
Once again, I'd invite anyone in the audience who has a question to come up and ask it.
He's feeling lonely at that microphone. All right.
Hello, everyone. Elliot Rogers, student president here at K-State Polytechnic campus. Question spurred from changes in T-vals, actually. We've heard some changes going on with that. I believe a committee looking at evaluation in general. I was wondering if you had kind of a charge or where you see changes to evaluation going over the next couple of years.
I haven't gotten the report back. Really good question, Elliot. Thank you for bringing it up. So as I arrived here at Kansas State, the Student Government Association had requested that all classes, all times be evaluated, not necessarily using the T-vals, but be evaluated. And mathematics is a great example. They have their own evaluation tool that they utilize. On the average, most people use the T-vals, but we also have the Idea Center evaluation available. But we just ask that all courses at all times be evaluated. So I came on board after that vote had been taken. First couple of questions I got, well, if you are teaching online, then you don't have to do an evaluation. I said, no, all courses every time. If you're teaching in overload, you don't have to do an evaluation. I said, no, all courses all the time. Now, some students have said evaluation fatigue. How many classes do you take a semester, Elliot? Do you have to do it each time? So a committee was put together. They're working on that. And I have not seen the final report, but I know there's students and faculty involved in that. Jana Fallon from the Office of the Teaching and Learning Center is working very diligently on that. But I think it's an important issue to bring up. It sounds good, every course, every time. And I look at that on a semester basis, and I talk to deans when there are lots of departments within their units that are not doing it on a regular basis. For the most part, our faculty are doing it, but how are they using that data? Are they gaining anything from it? The T-val is, how well did you teach? The Idea Center evaluation is, what can you learn about for the next time you teach the course to get better as a teacher, not how did they like you. And I don't know how mathematics is set up, but for the most part, faculty are being quite responsive to the request, but we want it to be something that people learn from, that students feel good about doing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, well, we've reached the end of my list of questions. Do you have anything else you'd like to add? Closing comments?
I'd like to add a few comments about how we started with FY17. You know, first the Senate and the House in Kansas said they were not going to cut in FY17. And, you know, I breathed a pretty big sigh of relief because it is February 13th. And we only have so much time left in FY17. Our enrollment went down. We know we have to fill that gap and the gap of revenue from tuition. So we were feeling, okay, it's not as bad as it could be. Well, now they're talking about cutting. And in FY17, that's going to be very difficult. Some people have one-time dollar reserves that they can utilize, but you know, we've gone through a lot of cuts and we've used a lot of that. So I'm kind of holding my breath for what the legislature will do. We are being proactive in thinking about what will happen in FY18. We don't think it's reasonable to continue cutting everybody the same amount. So if there's a 3% cut, we cut everybody across the board. So we've been working on weighted metrics for enrollment, student credit hour generation. Now that's not on your campus. It's for the Manhattan campus minus veterinary med. We've also put other things in there like extramural funding generation, number of faculty, number of majors, that kind of thing. Well, you can work that and work that and work that, and we have with all of the deans. The things that we've been talking about at the Dean's Retreat and then last week with the Budget Advisory Committee are different than that. They're really looking at what can we do that would differentiate units if they're doing really well to cut them less. Tough conversations. And we've been charged as the Budget Advisory Committee from the very onset of the committee, well, you're just cutting across the board, that's not very strategic. You're right, not very strategic, but come up with a way to differentially cut. And the person who's cut less thinks it's a grand idea, and the person who's cut more thinks it's the worst idea ever. So we're really working hard to come up with ways that are very justifiable and people can understand them. But there are going to be winners and losers in that whole system.
And it's a very easy way for your president to become very unpopular very quickly. Having said that, the only way I've ever seen this work is you never get consensus. So somebody's going to have to make a decision on how we're going to do that, distribute cuts. That'll probably be me. And I'm prepared to do that. I'm prepared to be unpopular in some sectors and wildly popular in others, which could change the next year. So, but that's just the nature of the beast. I've been involved in this personally in the military. We've had the same issues, and you have to make a call, and on budget, allocating the budget with cuts, and it's sometimes it's easy to do, 3% to everybody. Other times we've been doing that for too long, so we can wind up with pretty mediocre programs across the board. And we have some that are really good, and we have some that are, people's judgment will say are not quite as strong. So we'll have to make those judgments. And this is, like I say, I'll take the hit, and I'm prepared to be unpopular, but you got to, in the situation we're in, we have to do that. Sorry, life. And it ought to be motivation for those that aren't quite as good to figure out how to make them stronger. And we'll help do that too. So that's what I think will come. I'm not expecting the Budget Advisory Committee say, well, Mr. President, here it is. We got it all figured out. You're going to say, we don't know.
Good.
Well, no, just, and you're going to give, hopefully give the President and the Cabinet some options, and we'll figure out from there how we're going to go. Yes, ma'am.
We understand that there's been a task force appointed on main campus to look at tuition strategies, and likewise on our campus, members of the CCOP committee have been charged with the task of looking at our tuition, at some options, at things that make us more appealing, more competitive, that make it easier for our recruitment folks to go out and say, come to Kansas State University, including block grant tuition strategies, out-of-state tuition waivers, and I'm just curious about your thoughts on those matters.
So the task force is chaired by Ethan Erickson from our budget office. They're looking at everything. So the things that I'm just going to say, it's not that they have chosen anything. They're, again, a group, a subgroup of the Budget Advisory Committee that will come back and give us counsel. One of the things they're looking at is differential tuition, which we have a surcharge for business and for engineering, but we've not called it differential tuition. KU has differential tuition in those two colleges. So we're looking at differential tuition. A lot of universities have that. They're looking at banded tuition. So what is banded tuition? You pay for 15, but you can take 21 if you can get your advisor to sign off on it, or 18, meaning that you don't pay for every single credit hour. There's some people that are very supportive of this, that you pay for 15 always, and you can then take 18, and might this help students graduate in 4 years? And that has been seen in some places. We get a lot of students that take 12 hours or 14 hours, and then when they drop a 3-credit course, for whatever reason, they get into financial aid problems. So we're trying to address that issue. They're looking at upper level versus lower level courses. A 100-level course is different in cost to administer than a 400-level course, so, or an 800-level course. So we're looking at that. But the committee has been tasked to really look at all sorts of different ways that people are doing this. And one of the reasons I put the committee together is we have been limited in our tuition increases. Last year it was, we had a certain level. 2 years ago it was 2.6. It was the 1.6% over the CPI. So we were capped at 2.6. Well, our expenses were much more than a 2.6% increase in tuition. And people went to having to increase fees. And that's really difficult for students and faculty and parents to understand. Well, this course has this fee and this course has that fee, and how can you even predict what fall semester is going to cost versus spring semester? So we're trying to get our arms around that so that we can have a strategy in how our tuition and fees work. We've evolved, which is not saying it's wrong, it just evolved over a period of time. And now we're saying, wait a minute, shouldn't we get our arms around this and say, what do we really want it to be now, rather than let it continue to evolve? We've asked the committee to do a lot, and we've asked them to give us a May interim report. I don't anticipate they'll be done. They're doing a lot of research. I'm making e-introductions for Ethan to a number of people that I know across the nation that have different kinds of tuition, so that he can really dig in and talk to those people.
And I would say a corollary to this is the, we had a task force on enrollment strategies, and John Buckwalter, Dean Buckwalter, chaired that and reported out to the cabinet, and we adopted all but one of the recommendations. So there are already some changes in terms of the tuition we're offering in the KC metro area, Colorado, Texas, but specifically targeted to try to help. We've done some of that in the past. KC metro is fairly new, and so Dr. Bosco is working with all that, putting all that in the hopper to try to make sure we can get, hopefully, level off our enrollment and then slowly increase our enrollment. Another thing we're doing that I think relates, that hasn't been mentioned, is the push to go to needs-based scholarship, not just merit-based, because we have a lot of first-generation folks that are certainly capable of higher education work, but may not have the financial wherewithal to attend a university. So that's a big push, actually, throughout the campus and with the foundation. So when we talk to donors, we're talking now needs-based scholarship, and we'll start measuring that. That'll be a big piece of what we measure going forward, because we think there are people that could take advantage of that.
This is a really complex issue.
Yep.
You mentioned block. KU's had the block tuition. So you come in your freshman year, you may pay a little bit more, but you are assured of that same tuition throughout your 4 years on the campus. Yep. I don't know what happens if you take 5 or 6, but anyway. Last year, for the first time that I remember, the chancellor reported there were fewer students opting into the block. Well, that was because the regular tuition only went up 2.6% that year that the Regents capped tuition, but the block had a model in it that it went up 5%. So they actually got dinged. So we almost need to know what the rules are going to be, and different regents seem to interpret the rules a little bit differently, so it's been hard for us to get a feel for that. You had a follow-up question.
Not at the mic, so you might need to repeat.
I'll repeat it for you.
I'll repeat, okay.
But can you speak to the fact, just for everyone, because they know that the committee that you formed in Manhattan is not addressing tuition at K-State Polytechnic or some of the other facilities. We're doing that separately. These people are.
I can repeat the question. I'm not sure I can answer the question. We've put a group together on the Manhattan campus to look at tuition and fees, both. And maybe Verna and I need to talk about what's going on here. What we do need to be somewhat attentive to is that we're all communicating to each other. And we have an inter-campus group that your dean serves on that helps us do that. Because the tuition and fees at Olathe are different than the Manhattan campus. So we are probably being pretty Manhattan-centric, but certainly I hope that all three of our campuses will be informing each other. We're not making decisions here. We're gathering information and thinking about it. So maybe, Verna, you could do a follow-up on that. I'm not sure what's happening here on campus.
Well, I know
Mike,
Yes.
Mike.
Hold it, bring it down, yeah.
I'm short. I know that we've charged a committee here on this campus to model the one that's in Manhattan. We do have the plans of having Ethan or someone from that committee coming out and informing our campus committee as well. So there is a lot of communication, but as the provost identified, all of our units, Olathe, Manhattan, and Polytechnic, we have, and Global Campus as well, we have different tuition models. We need to make sure that we're all aware of what's going on and that we're all working together, but they are very different already. So in a sense, we already have differential tuition, in a sense.
Yeah, different tuitions.
If there are no more questions, let's thank President Myers. And
Well, before you do that, thank you all for asking questions, for being here this morning, we appreciate it. We appreciate the opportunity to come over and be at Polytechnic for at least an hour. And then we're all running back to meetings, and like I said, I'll be talking to the House Higher Education Budget Committee this afternoon. You know, one of the things that's interesting to compare is that the Board of Regents have, is it Foresight 2020? That's their plan for higher education and community colleges to meet the workforce needs in Kansas. And every time you take a ding in the budget, it's less. We're behind already in Kansas in providing for just the workforce needs that we know of. Nothing new, but know of. And with every budget cut, it becomes less likely we're ever going to attain those 2020 goals, which I think is the research that went into Foresight 2020. It's a good way to sort of argue for the need for more stable and perhaps higher support for higher education and the community colleges as well. So if you haven't read that recently, it's not a bad document, well researched, has a lot of good data in it that can help us argue for more stability and higher funding too. I think that in the legislature they talked about maybe turning this corner in 19. 17, we hope we don't get a cut. 18, they won't be quite there yet with some new revenue schemes, but by 18 they will, and then by 19 we could be the beneficiary of, as a statewide, of a better revenue model so we don't get swacked. Thank you all for being here. We appreciate it.
thank you.
Dr. Bennett, thank you.
And thank you for being here. The president will be back in the fall, of course, for the State of the University address, and I hope to see you. I will note Faculty Senate will have their monthly meeting here in June. So you will have the full Faculty Senate traveling over from Manhattan to Salina in order that they can see all the wonderful things that are going on here. Thank you very much.